whilst we're waiting for everyone to join in to today's webinar, I can see there that we've now got a large number of people joining in. My name's Greg Boller. I'll do another introduction in a few minutes. And we've got Phil Day as joining us to present today. And we've got Rachel in the background doing the background administration of today's webinar. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes, folks, for everyone to settle in. And then we're going to get started on the first of our webinar series. We've got a number of these webinars coming up over the next few weeks. We thought that these would be a great tool to just help people while away the time. That screen there I'm just showing is just next week's webinar after today is a live walkthrough of the Fontaine-Pajot Elba 45. And then the following week we have John Hembrow from the Down Under Rally is going to join us and give us an introduction to offshore cruising. John's got a fantastic set of videos that he's done. And then we're doing a brokerage walkthrough on the 29th. So it looks like we've now got most of the expected participants in, so we'll get started. So as I said, my name's Greg Boller. I'm the new yacht sales manager for Multihull Solutions. And with me is Phil Day. And the intention today was just to keep things simple to start with. We're starting with the introduction to catamarans. And just before we roll on, we wanted to just give you some housekeeping tips. You've probably noticed that we've made sure that all your videos are turned off and your microphone. So Big Brother has control. We're controlling that. If you do want to ask questions or just say hello or give us any information or pull us up on anything, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A box. There's a Q&A toggle on your screen. And throughout the presentation, as Phil's talking, if there's a question that's needs to be answered straight away, we'll pull up and ask Phil to answer that. Otherwise, we'll leave the questions and answers to the end of the presentation. So, Phil, you've now got 35 happy people watching you.
Excellent.
So just moving on. So as I said, my name's Greg. We've got Rachel in the background. And presenting today, that's there is just an example of where you can type your questions and answers. And just on this next page here, you can see I'm going to ask Phil to introduce himself and bring us up to speed on who he is, and then we'll get rolling with our presentation. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody from across Australia and maybe a few overseas. And I hope the weather's pretty good for you. It's lovely here in Brisbane at the moment. I don't like to gloat, but I will. It's about 28 degrees at our house at the moment, so very, very nice. A little bit warm in those southern states, and in WA I think it's a bit cold as well. So welcome everybody. Look, my experience, over 40 years of sailing experience. I started way back when I was about 15 or 16, probably 15. I was actually built a little tiny sailing boat. I was down in Victoria. I used to sail that on Albert Park Lake. And over the years I've built other boats or modified them, repaired them and so on. So I've owned at least 10 multi-hulls, probably a lot more than that, but it's around about 10 multi-hulls. And I have owned a couple of monohulls. Don't tell anybody, please. So I built the first boat I built was a little dinghy, and then had a few other boats on the way. And I actually then built a Warram catamaran, a 27-foot Warram catamaran when I was about 20 years of age, and sailed that around Western Port Bay. That was lots of fun, and yeah, it was quite a fast little boat for what it was. Now, my background in sailing, I've done racing, and a lot of people know me in the racing scene because I've won a few trophies along the way. But what a lot of people don't realise, I've done a lot of cruising, probably done more cruising than I have racing. You don't sort of tend to get medals for going cruising. So a lot of cruising with the family and also with friends along the way. And that's mainly up and down the east coast of Australia, whether it be down in Victoria through Bass Strait, up the east coast and so on. Whitsundays many times. I sort of know that part of the world like the back of my hand now. And I also do a lot of coastal work in the way of deliveries. I've actually retired now from the yacht brokering business. I was a yacht broker. I think I started in 1997 and ran my own business for many, many years, for about 20 years. And I've now sold that business, and I then went and worked on a part-time basis for Multihull Solutions, and still help them out, as you know. But now that I've retired a bit, I'm taking more time out to do some deliveries, whether it be bringing boats back from Victoria up to Queensland through Bass Strait. Had a rather interesting one back in November. We had some very strong winds. I think on 5 different occasions we hit 50 knots on the wind gauge, which is rather interesting. I've got a Fontaine Peugeot Helia 44 up to around about 17 odd knots with just the jib up. So I think that might be a world record. And I've just recently returned from overseas, and I went over to Panama, and I helped, I was the skipper bringing a boat through the Panama Canal and across to the Galapagos and across to French Polynesia. So that was rather interesting. When we neared French Polynesia, the French Polynesian government started all the lockdowns, and we weren't allowed on any islands. So I wasn't allowed to see these beautiful islands and the Tuamotus or Marquesas. And then I managed to get home, and I was locked up for 2 weeks down in Sydney for isolation. So to make sure I didn't have a virus. And I'm back home now, which is a great relief. So moving on to the first part of the presentation is why did I buy a multi-hull? And it's probably why do they want to buy a multi-hull? Well, for me, the main thing was probably stability. I did have a little trailer sailor back in the early days, and little 18-footer. It was lots of fun, a nice little boat, but every time it heeled over, it was really uncomfortable. My wife didn't like the heeling over that much, and I think after a while, she didn't really want to go on the boat. So I started looking around for other boats back into maybe, we had the Warren originally, and then had a trailer sailor. Then I thought, well, what else is around? I actually then started having a few trimarans. So stability and comfort, is fantastic. When you're walking around in your lounge room, you're walking on a level surface. And when you're on a multi-hull, a big catamaran, you're walking around on a nice level surface, and it makes it very easy and comfortable. It also, they're very sea kindly. I had a problem. I used to get seasick in the old days, and when I was in monohulls and going down below, I used to start feeling very, very green, or I had to be on the chart or on navigation or the radio work. It was terrible. So I went over to multi-hulls, and nowhere near as many problems with seasickness. I do hear some stories from people saying, oh, I don't get a multi-hull that's got a terrible motion, it'll get seasick, it's a horrible motion. Well, I don't believe that. I just love the motion of a multi-hull now. It's a lot easier to move around. And just on that, obviously there's no heeling. So when you're heeling over, you don't have to worry about putting all the dishes away. On a multi-hull, we get a bit slack when I leave the fruit bowl out, the dishes out, and everything's sitting on the table. And about 10, 15 years ago, when my kids were quite young, they used to sit on our boat. We'd be sailing across the bay, and they'd be making card houses out of packs of cards while we're sailing along. So you couldn't do that on a monohull.
I just might interrupt too there for a minute. Phil, we just had a comment there from one of your colleagues from your trip across to Tahiti. Peter, just saying that he's still in Tahiti.
Oh, good on you. Good day, Pete. He's the skipper of the boat I sailed across the Pacific. And he's just got back to Tahiti now, ready to the rest of the voyage for him. Hello, Peter. The other thing with these, with multi-hulls, very, very safe, very stable. They have built-in buoyancy tanks. They don't carry lots of lead around inside them, so inherently they're a lot more buoyant. And in some cases, such as my own boat, you can't sink it. It's positively buoyant, even without the buoyancy tanks. The thing I liked about having a multi-hull was a fast passage maker. Now, this may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I like a bit of speed and it's good fun. You don't have to do 20 knots like I do, but instead of doing 5 knots, you can bubble along doing 7 or 8 knots, and it's very pleasant. The other thing too is shallow draft. You can get in a lot closer to your anchorage. You don't have to anchor out in really deep water because you've got a 6 or 8 foot keel, and I don't have to worry about running aground, because with my boat, I've got Daggerboards, I can lift the Daggerboards up. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. So when you're looking at catamarans and looking just multi-hulls in general, whether it's a trimaran or a catamaran, when you're looking for one, you've got to work out what you want, what sort of usage you're going to get out of the boat. Is it just bay cruising or harbour cruising? Do you want to go coastal cruising, offshore sailing, world cruising, or racing? So that sort of narrows it down to what style of boat you want. And that's one of the first questions I always ask when I met customers down at the boatyard. You know, they're looking for a catamaran. What were their plans? Obviously, a lot of people want to do bay cruising and harbour cruising, and then later on go on to coastal cruising. Some people want to go offshore, some people don't. Offshore sailing boat means a whole different sort of boat altogether. You might have in a bigger boat. And then same with the world cruising, you know, a bigger boat, but also how much extra gear you want to carry, like water makers. Then we move into the racing side of things. We've got a picture there of a really nice racing boat, carbon fibre racing boat. You know, that may not be everybody's cup of tea, but we also do sell racing boats as well. And whether it's a coastal cruiser, coastal racer, or offshore racer, that's, you need to work out what you want to do there.
So Phil, you touched on it earlier. This, if we go back there slightly, you touched on the why multi-hull, and often the big question is what we've just got here, the question of a monohull versus multi-hull. You've already touched on some of that about stability and seasickness, but I think that's where we'd like to head next, if that's okay.
Yeah. Now, with monohulls versus multi-hulls, look, there's nothing wrong with a monohull. If that's your cup of tea, you want to go that way. But once you get onto a nice catamaran or a nice trimaran, you'll go, wow, this is pretty amazing. And in our my recent cruise across the Pacific, there's a lot of big monohulls out there, you know, 57 footers and 60 footers. And when those people started coming past our big trimaran and looking inside it, they couldn't believe the amount of room, which they were just gobsmacked. So I think we had a few converts happening there as well. So look, one of the things is their heeling. So when a boat heels over, it is hard to move around inside the boat. You can have one leg shorter and one leg longer sort of thing, and you're sort of grabbing onto things as you move around. In a catamaran, it is a very, very stable boat. They do tend to lean about, you know, 5 degrees or so. And with a trimaran, they lean a little bit further, but it's very, very easy to move about the boat. And the other thing, just on the heeling, as I mentioned, you don't need to put everything away. I know in the old days, I had my little trailer sailor. Before we set off for the day, everything had to be packed up, put away in cupboards and sealed away. The other thing is also preparations of meals. Going for a day sail, we're heading up the coast from one point on the Whitsundays, heading up a little bit further north. If you're on a monohull, all the time you end up making sandwiches and making food ready to go, or soup in a thermos. Whereas on a catamaran, you don't even have to think about that. I've got a bit blasé about it now. You just go sailing, and then somebody will say, who wants a toasted cheese sandwich? You just walk inside and make a toasted cheese sandwich and come out with sandwiches and drinks just during the day. Whereas with a keel boat, you know, it's not quite as easy.
And I just got a message too there, Phil, from one of my colleagues. Important to remember too throughout this discussion, we also a newly evolving area, or not newly evolving, but certainly for us with the MY range of power catamarans, is that a lot of what we're discussing here is not only applicable to sailing catamarans, it's also applicable to power catamarans, all the additional volume, the lack of heeling, and so on. So I just wanted to make that comment just in recognition of a question that was just asked.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same goes for the power catamarans and so on. We just go back to that the previous slide again.
I'm trying. There we go. That one.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the open plan living. It's not claustrophobic. You're up on. We move to the next slide. That's the one there. So you're living up above the gunnel height. It makes a huge difference. Look, on a monohull, you climb down below, and look, it's very beautiful and it's very nice down below, but you don't get to see the view. On a catamaran, you can see those shots. They're just beautiful panoramic shots. you have this now, I call the alfresco dining, indoor, outdoor dining. You just one level area all the way through the boat. It's easy. You're not going up and down steps, you're not going up and down ladders. You've got that beautiful view. The $1 million view is just all around you. And once again, that does help with seasickness too. Once you go down below, a lot of people start feeling rather queasy. You sit in a catamaran and got that lovely view. By seeing where you're going and by seeing the horizon, you won't get as queasy. It's fantastic. And then you go out in the cockpit. There's a catamaran there on the left, which is a Pescott, similar to mine. It's a smaller cockpit than what you got on the big Fontainebleaus and lagoons, but it's all out in the open and you have sunshade over the top of you. It is fantastic. And people can sit around and dine and have a few drinks and nibbles at the end of the day.
And those pictures there, I think, are a great example of just the progression and the evolution. And I'm not putting down one or the other, but the pictures on the right just show that no steps. It's just same level all the way through.
Absolutely, no trip hazards or anything. And there's another great view there. So when you're actually sitting inside that boat, you've got an internal helm, you have external helms. When you're at the galley, you're washing up dishes and looking out the window and think, wow, what a wonderful view. So it's that living space you got there as well. There's the first top left-hand photo there. That's just out the cockpit and it's easy to walk in and out. And then there's a table outside, there's tables inside, big couches and lounges. The other thing too, if you're doing a long passage and night sailing, some people like to sleep on the couch. That's what I actually did when I was crossing the Pacific from the Galapagos Islands to Marquesas Islands. I slept on the couch. It was I was in contact with the other crew members and I found it really comfortable. And then you move down below, those bottom two shots are actually down in the cabins. You've got vast rooms, you've got big double beds, you've got walk around style of island beds as well. You don't have to climb over people anymore. The way the designs of these catamarans, they're getting bigger and larger, more open inside because we're using all these modern building techniques. They're just a fantastic, house inside.
Very good. And then moving on, Phil, we've got, I seem to have mouse issues. There we go. And you're talking there about down below, and this is the other massive advantage of the multi-hulls, isn't it? It's just this
all the extra cabins. You can have like some call it the charter option with 4 cabins, but some boats just have 4 cabins anyway. The boat the big Neil 51 trimaran I was on, actually had 5 double cabins and we had 5 bathrooms and 5 showers and had so much room and people were so jealous. And then you've got a picture of a catamaran here with big island beds. You've got your own ensuite and toilets. It just so roomy and so comfortable. The other thing this does too, if you're on a long voyage, one of the problems being on a small platform and you might have 6 people or 8 people on board, you need your own space. If you're too confined and living in each other's pockets, it's just too much sometimes. It's great to get down into your own space and take, have time out, whether you're reading a book or watching a movie on your laptop. You've got that own space you can go to and have a bit of quiet time as well. And then you can come up into the main living area and socialise up there as well.
Very good. There's a couple more shots there. And that image there is probably a 10 to 12-year-old multi-hull, a brokerage multi-hull. So an example of just the volume and the space down below.
Yep. And the other great advantage, people don't sort of think, I don't think about this anymore, I'm getting too used to it, but it's the amount of deck room you've got. So you've got all this extra space on the deck. So that's more room for equipment. So you've got a gentleman there on his stand-up paddleboard and the little kid sitting on the board. So you've got room to store all these devices. Now, whether it's a dinghy or it's kayak or stand-up paddleboard, these can be strapped along the gunnels. They can be folded up and rolled down in the lazarettes at the back of the boat and stored away there. You also have big davits nowadays, so you can put up, quite large dinghies and outboards. So you can have a 12-foot or 3.6 metre inflatable hard bottom rib dinghy on the back with a 50-horse outboard. So that's instead of just having a little 8-foot or 7-foot inflatable with a 5-horse or a 3-horse like you do on a lot of monohulls, you actually got a proper a boat you can zoom around in. And those dinghies actually become they become your sort of little runabout car. So if you want to go ashore and go to the shops, you can do that, or leave the boat moored at one nice little bay and then zoom across to another bay and go exploring for the day, or even go fishing. So the dinghy becomes like your small runabout car, and that's fantastic. And that shot there, you can see a platform, which is a duckboard there, which raises and lowers. So that's great for putting extra gear on, or if you're diving and snorkeling, you can swim up and sit on that and then put your snorkel and goggles on. So there's all these advances in our technology and all the extra bits and pieces which make these boats just a fantastic boat to be on.
And one thing there too, Phil, is the space for solar. On a monohull, it's a little bit hard to find those flat areas to put your panels. Whereas on the multi-hulls, you've got all that coach house roof space, yeah?
Absolutely. We got multiple panel space. And once again, I go back to our trip across the Pacific. The boat we had, I'm just trying to think how many panels we probably had. I think we had 8 panels on the boat.
About 1,200 watts?
We never have to run the generator to top up the power. The only time we ran the generator was to make water. So the boat was making its own power all the time over a 24-day period. No problems with power. And and nowadays with modern solar panels, they're more efficient. Smaller panels are more efficient, getting out more power. So you've got so much room. You don't have wind generators. It's just a nice, quiet way of making power.
Okay, so now moving on, Phil, the next topic that we chose to bring to the table was just this question of what size catamaran is right for me. So if you could maybe launch into that, that'd be great.
Right, this sort of, people ask me, well, what size boat do I need? And first of all, just look at what the usage you're going to have it for. As I said before, we've got bay cruising and harbour cruising, coastal cruising, offshore and world cruising. So look, if you're just doing bay and harbour cruising, you can get away with a 30-footer if that's what you want to do. You don't want to have a big expensive mooring. You can get away with a smaller boat, but some people still like to have a larger boat, have more room for the family and friends. So that's okay. But just, excuse me, just be aware that if you go too large, it's become, instead of just taking two people going out the boat, you might have to take out 4 people. So it's the berthing coming back at the end of the day. If you have too big a boat, you might need to take more people out with you. So there's nothing wrong with having a 36-foot boat. That's the size of my boat. I've had it since 2003, and it's been fantastic what I do, which is mainly just bay and coastal cruising. Once you start coastal cruising, you may want to go a little bit bigger, 42 foot, 38, 42 foot, quite okay. And it's easy to come in at the marinas every couple of days. Once you go offshore, obviously, the longer the waterline length, the better it is. So just it makes, along with what the boat is, it rides over the waves. So you don't get hobby horsing. Now, just that slide there is the second point. Hobby horsing is really a thing of the past, unless you've got a very short little lightweight catamaran or trimaran. It still may hobby horse a little bit because it's sitting in between the troughs of the waves. But a bigger catamaran, they sit very flat. They cruise so well. In the old days, you used to get a lot of people complaining about catamarans hobby horsing, but we're talking about technology 30 plus years ago. So that's all been modern designs. Most cats don't hobby horse at all. The other thing too, the larger the boat, obviously the bigger payload you can carry. So when you're cruising offshore and you want to take more food and more equipment, the trip we just undertook, we were at sea for up to 3, maybe up to 5 weeks. So we carried a lot of food and a lot of spares and things like that. So the bigger the boat is better. So, and then you've also got more storage space to put all that extra gear, whether you want to carry extra oils and oil filters and bits and pieces for the engines in case you want to just something goes wrong, extra ropes and a bit of extra wire. You've got all the extra space and the boat can handle that.
Do you say extra wine?
No. Yes, you could take extra wine along, absolutely. You'd even do your own home brewing on board as well because the boat's very stable.
And it's interesting, each year we're fortunate enough to be able to go to the boat shows like the Cannes Boat Show in France, obviously not this year. But one thing is that it's a show where every yacht is lined up beside each other. And if you go on the smallest model of the Fontaine Pajot, the Lucia 40, and then the Astria 42, the Elba 45, Saona 47, and so on. What's quite interesting is often the bunk size and everything like that is not that much different, but the big difference is you step up in size is the extra cupboard space, the extra locker space. So it's very, very true what you're saying about overall internal volume and storage space.
Yeah, and the overall internal volume, so it's just so much more room down below, not just for people, but for your extra clothes, towels, linen, food, and so on. Yeah.
And listen, a comment that came through, and yesterday when we were talking about this, Phil, you did bring it up. One of our colleagues has just brought up a comment, and I think you did want to mention it. It's about the advantage of speed in helping make voyage time shorter.
Yes, look, I talked about speed earlier on. I like a bit of speed. I like to blast along on my own boat. It's a fairly lightweight, fast boat, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. And when I'm talking to people about performance of a catamaran, people say to me, I'm not into speed, I'm more of a cruising person. But by that, if you're sitting on, I just made a few notes before, if you're sitting on 5 knots in a monohull, and a lot of the fleet we were with doing the World Arc Rally across the Pacific, they were sitting on that sort of 5.5 knots. Now that 5 knots over 25 days, doing a 3,000 mile passage from Galapagos Islands to Marquesas. So it takes 5 knots, it'll take you 25 days. Now, if you average 7 knots, which is not a lot faster, and it's not a fast speed, it's a very comfortable speed to do, you actually get your, from 25 days, it drops down to 18 days. In other words, it's a week faster. So It's not about, so I'd prefer to be at the islands for another week longer instead of to be out in the middle of the Pacific for an extra week when I can't see any islands, just blue sky and blue water everywhere. It'd be nice to be in the islands for an extra week longer. So
it's such a valid point, because a lot of people think speed means that you've got this need to go racing. Speed isn't about racing all the time. Speed is just about voyage management as much as anything. Yeah.
And also, if there is a storm brewing or something like that, that little bit extra speed, it means you can get away or either outrun that storm and get to the anchorage before the storm hits, or you can actually sail around it. And we had some clients of ours who recently, they were sailing from Tahiti back to Australia, only landed Monday a week ago, and they were had to divert and try and sail around Cyclone Harold, which is a Category 5 cyclone, which is huge, and they big storm. So they managed to manoeuvre around that over a few days without any troubles at all. Didn't get caught by the storm at all. So that's another great advantage too, by having that little extra speed.
Okay, and as I said, we'll answer the questions at the end, but there was just one question there from Yan Lee about what would be the minimum size recommended to go offshore. And I just will pick up on that while we're on this subject, size of catamaran. Even just 2 weeks ago, there was a South African family arrived in the Gold Coast who had just sailed across from La Rochelle in France across the Atlantic, through the Panama, down across the Pacific on a Lucia 40, which is the smallest model of Fontaine Pajot. And they did that fine. And as you and I were talking yesterday, Phil, things have changed a lot too with modern technology in terms of the weather routing and stuff like that. And that is the ability for people to see the weather in advance is also just helping probably changing some of the ways in which people will make their decisions about sailing a 40-footer versus a 50-footer.
Yes, look, that's one thing. Technology now with satellite phones, satellite weather routing, and you can log on every day, every hour if you want to, and get latest weather updates about what storms are coming. There's so many weather routing programs on the market now. You're not isolated. You can even look at your Facebook from day to day if you really want to on a boat. So you go back, 5-10 years ago, everything you could do it once a day, or it was very slow technology. It's getting faster and faster. So those smaller boats, if you see a storm coming, you say, well, let's stay in this port a bit longer, or we'll sail off to a certain group of islands and stay there for 10 days and let that storm pass away beneath us. and off we go again. So it's a lot safer as long as you can have the right technology and log into that. So it does make a big difference. Also, the charts and the plotters and things like that, modern technology of that is fantastic. It makes it navigating so easy. It really is easy.
Definitely. And listen, I said that we would answer the questions at the end, but there's just one other quick question I'd like to answer there. It's about a powered catamaran from Nick. Good question, Nick. My colleague Andrew De Bruin might contact you privately, but we just had an MY44 as an example cruise from Thailand to the Maldives. So, and they did that safely and well. Powered catamaran cruising is really just limited by your fuel capacity and distance. But we'll keep going. So moving on, the next question, the next slide, Phil, is all about Daggerboards versus mini keels.
Oh, this one can open a can of worms, particularly with me. Well, you see a photograph there of a lagoon, and also on the right-hand side, you've got a Pescott Whitehaven, beautiful boat. I reckon it's the prettiest boat in the world. It's actually my boat. It's got Daggerboards. So what's better? What's the difference? The pros and the cons? Look, most boats now which are being produced are mini keel boats because people don't want to go hard to windward, and they don't need that weather routing nowadays. They can wait an extra day or two, wait for that horrible headwind to disappear, and then off they go again. So mini keel boats are the most popular ones around at the moment, and most of the boats you'll find out being sold brand new or on the second-hand market will have mini keels. But I get questions like, look, can I beach my boat? I've got Daggerboards. And I say, yes, you can. I do that quite regularly. The difference is a Daggerboard boat will generally point higher. So around about 45 to 42 degrees into the true wind, or maybe a little bit less than that if you've got you're a good sailor and you've got a good set of sails. Whereas on a production mini keel boat, you probably point up to about 45 degrees, and you probably be averaging maybe 48 degrees. Now, if you're sailing downwind and taking all the trade winds, it doesn't matter. You just hop on a nice big mini keel boat and away you go. You've got lots of room. It's a lot simpler, and it's a lot cheaper. Once you start building Daggerboard boats, the cost of building Daggerboards and their cases and so on are rather expensive.
And it does encroach on the internal volume.
It does encroach on the internal volume. So you either got to tuck the boards off to the side a bit, or some people on the bigger boats, that Daggerboard's in the middle of the cabin and it forms a division for a bathroom or a shower or something like that. So it all depends what your usage. Look, most of the time, if you're cruising and you plan to go sailing downwind and tropical cruising up in Queensland or across the Pacific, mini keel's a fantastic way to go.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil. So hang on, my mouse is playing games again. The next screen, engine types.
Engine types. We've got outboards versus diesels. Look, the most common engine on all catamarans seems to be a twin diesel setup. You've got a diesel in each hull, and that's the most common way of doing it. So there are outboards out there. My own boat's got outboards. They work really well. If you're going to go outboards, it's really from around about a 40, maybe a 38 footer and less, because you don't get big outboards and they just get maybe too busy and too hard to install into the boat. So making a diesel is really easy to sit inside a hull. Outboards are very economical. People say they use too much fuel. No, they don't. Modern four strokes like a Yamaha 9.9 or a Yamaha 25, they use about the same amount of fuel as a diesel. People get concerned that outboards and petrol is dangerous on a boat. It's no more dangerous than a petrol car versus a diesel car. Cars go hurtling down the highway at 100 kilometres an hour, and they're not exploding on the highway every day. No, it's if their outboards are put into a boat properly, they're no more dangerous than a diesel. Probably the disadvantage of outboards is they don't have big alternators. They can't generate as much power. But on my boat, I've got more solar panels, so I don't have an issue. But they're basic outboards for the smaller, lighter weight boats. And once you get over 40 foot, just run diesels. Then you've got big alternators which can pump out a lot of power, 55, 110, 150 amps of power out of each engine. So it's probably an easy way to go. Then we move into, there's a new technology now.
And just to pull you up there, Phil, something we mentioned yesterday to each other, the other thing with the diesels is there's also an advantage these days on finding the catamaran that has the engine room separate from the living space rather than the diesel underneath the bunk.
Yeah, what's happening now with the design of catamarans, probably going back 15 odd years ago, a lot of the diesels were being put under those aft beds. And look, it worked okay, but look, it meant there was a little extra noise coming out of the area. And then if you had any diesel leaks or you changed a fuel filter, that little bit of a diesel smell would be in that aft cabin. Nowadays, we're finding more and more of the engine rooms are actually separate. So you're having an engine room separate with a sail drive down the back of the boat. And that keeps all the noise in its own separate area down the back of the boat. And obviously all the smells down the back, and you don't get the heat rising out of an engine into an aft bed. There's nothing wrong with that, having those engines down the back under a bed. But if you do get a fuel leak or something like that, it does get a little bit pongy and you can smell it. But so the newer boats, I think it's a better setup having it right down the back. Then we sort of move into this hybrid electric technology. Same things happen with cars on the roads nowadays, with the advancements of fantastic lithium-ion batteries, the technology in generating power, whether it's from solar or from various generators, is the way to go. Probably if I'll pass that on over to Greg, as he's seeing some of the latest developments happening overseas in France and so on with these hybrids and electric technologies.
Yeah, and I'll be quick on this, but most of the major larger manufacturers are all in cohorts or experiment stages with the engine manufacturers. Fontaine-Pajot has had a Lucia 40 now for a year and a half doing testing with Volvo Penta, doing the electric with an installed electric engine setup. It was supposed to be ready to go earlier this year, but they've been moving the goalposts a little bit. So as much as I think a lot of people want to see electric engine technology come into the production catamarans especially, it seems to be taking the manufacturers a little bit longer. I think they're a bit risk adverse, but it is there and it is happening, and it's a space to keep a close eye on. Okay, over the page, Phil. Types of construction. Let's not get too bogged down on this one. We could go on for hours.
Yeah, look, we won't get too bogged down in this because it's a lot. It can very, very high tech stuff, and we can go for hours on this. But look, basically,
actually, sorry, I've just got to pull you up. We just got this certain questions that are coming through, Phil, that we need to probably answer while they're there, while we're on that topic. Someone has asked the difference between sail drives and legs. Sorry, sail drives and shafts. I think it's a good question just to answer quickly while we're on the engine side of things.
Right, look, sail drives. Most production boats now have sail drives on their vessels. The reason is we don't actually have a photo of that, but the sail drive is just a gearbox system which bolts directly on the back of the diesel engine. Then it comes straight down. It looks like a bit of an outboard leg, but poking out the bottom of the hull of the boat. Most boats, production boats, have that technology now and use that setup. The reason is it's very simple to install. It's very foolproof. It's very quiet and smooth. You hop on a boat which has got a sail drive. It's beautiful, smooth drive. It just works so well, and it keeps the cost down when buying with a boat. If you go to sail drives are great. A lot of the racing guys or guys, the purists, they like having an engine mounted in the middle of their boat, and then that keeps all the weight in the middle. And then they have a drive shaft which puts the propeller towards the back. The problem with that is drive shafts can get wobbles, they get vibrations, the bearings can wear, and then it's a lot more work to put a shaft drive in. So look, if you're getting a mini keel boat, sail drives are the way to go, without a doubt. And the only reason you'd probably go for a drive shaft nowadays is you've got Daggerboards and you want to have a more efficient boat and have engine mounted right in the middle to keep the weight down. But the problem with putting an engine in the middle of the boat, it takes up headroom. So you have a step along the middle of your boat, and you lose your headroom inside the hulls.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Sorry to pull you up there, mate. On to the types of construction.
So look, there are various types of constructions. We have epoxy systems where you use epoxy, fiberglass sheath, timber and ply, and this will include strip plank cedar or balsa core. Now, my boat's a strip plank cedar boat, so it's Western red cedar from America, and it's glassed either side with special laid fiberglass, and they use an epoxy resin which bonds incredibly well to timber. And it's a great form of building a boat. It's light and it's strong, but it is very, very time consuming. Then we move into GRP or fiberglass boats, GRP being glass reinforced plastic with the everyday sort of fiberglass boats. Now that was the technology in the olden days. Most keel boats, older keel boats are done in that system, and a lot of the very early production catamarans were done in that system as well. It was a quick way of making a boat, but it makes them very heavy, and they don't sail as well. Then we move into what we call foam sandwich construction. Foam sandwich is a little bit like the epoxy construction, the first note. Basically, instead of being a timber core, such as strip plank cedar or balsa, they're using a foam core. It means the fiberglass is a little bit thicker, and but it's great for production. And
that's a typo there. That should say production or custom, not production of custom.
Yeah. So it can be a production boat or it can be a custom built boat. So that's what most of the modern sailing boats are using nowadays. And then we move into other areas such as they call the resin infusion. I'll move on to that one in a second. I'll get Greg to answer, but just we'll jump into the resins. So you have resins, which is actually the plastic part, and that's polyester resin. And that's what they used to use in the old days, old fishing boats and surfboards made in polyester resin, and all the old production fiberglass GRP boats will use polyester resin. The modern resin they now use in most production and foam sandwich boats and GRP boats is vinyl ester resin. And then we use epoxy. The epoxy resins tend to be used in the one-off built fiberglass or timber boats, so using one-off technology. Epoxy is great, but it is very expensive. And then we move into fibers. There's various sorts of fibers available. So you've got fiberglass, you have Kevlars, and you have carbon. Fiberglass is the most common, and there's a couple of different ways of using it. There's a chop strand, chopper gun, and specially laid. And then you have Kevlar. Doesn't get used as much nowadays, but it can be used as a protective layer under custom built boats. And then we have carbon, which gives you extra strength. And in the super duper fast racing boats, it's all carbon and foam, but it's very expensive.
A comment on carbon there. We were at the Neil factory, the Trimarine factory in France in January. And it's interesting that, they are a vinyl ester, foam cord, fiberglass laid boat, but in certain areas of the construction, they've got strips of carbon just to add that strength. So instead of putting a steel bar somewhere, they'll put a strip of carbon.
Yeah. It's like a titanium or something strong like that. It matches up well with it's a cloth fabric which gets laid and then gets impregnated with whatever resin's being used. And then on the outside of the boat, you've got two choices. You either go for a gel coat finish or a painted finish. Now it's broken down into two categories. Production boats will generally use a mold system, and that's where the gel coat gets used. In a one-off made or semi-production type built boat, a lot of the time they have a painted finish because you're not using a mold. It's a one-off and faired boat, and it's painted on the outside. There's pros and cons about both. So but generally, whether it's a Lagoon Fontainebleau or a Leopard or Light Wave or a Sea Wind, all those sort of boats, they all use a gel coat. That's what you see in most. And if it's a Beneteau or whatever, all those production boats nowadays use gel coat.
Okay. And
then we'll go back into this improved mass production processing of infusing resins and so on. Greg will just give you a brief on that.
Yeah, and we'll move fairly quickly, but obviously for many years, if you had a moulded construction, you would then hand lay. In this day and age, mostly now everyone is infusing, which is where in a a female mold. You would lay everything up, put a bag in, and then inject the resin and infuse it in one shot. And then the newest technology is the RTM, which is what a lot of the like Fontaine Peugeot on the new Elba 45, the whole coach house roof system from the mast all the way to the back of the cockpit is a resin transfer molded part, which means that you have an A mold and a B mold. You put everything into the A mold. The B mold comes down on top. It gets injected, and what you get is you get an A surface on both sides, whereas on a normal open mold, you just have an A surface on one side, as in the shiny surface, and then the unfinished surface on the inside. So they're saving weight, they're saving the need for liners, and so this whole technology of RTM is certainly a game changer for many of the larger manufacturers. So we'll keep moving. Once I get my mouse working again. Okay, so now we'll just tick through these different, you know, the one-off, the semi-production and the production pros and cons, Phil.
Yeah, so look, we've got there's three types of construction methods or types of boats made up. And I briefed on this before, but we've got three, which is the one-off and hand-laid boats, and we have small production boats and the mass production. So I'll just go through those three types of building boats. So construction methods there. So you have the one-off hand-laid. So the pros of that now, the picture on the right-hand side is my boat there with my little puppy dog on the deck. They're a custom-built boat. So they're not really made in a mould to have there is a moulding system. It's made of chipboard or MDF. And so it's a lot more labour in building these, because every time you build one of these boats, you've got to make these temporary frames or moulds to make the boat. They're generally a lighter weight boat if they're built well and you follow the plans properly. And the advantage is you can either build the boat yourself and save money, so you're not paying for the labour, or you can appoint a boat builder to build the boat as a one-off boat builder. And they're potentially a faster boat because they could be light. Now, in the case of my boat, it is very lightweight for what it is, and it is faster to build. And then we just go on to the cons. So the problem with a one-off made boat, I sometimes call them orphans. Not many people know about the design, or they don't understand who actually made that boat or what the quality was. So they generally have a lower resale value. The interior finishes, look, it's never as good. I'll have some owners out there saying, oh, my boat's better than a Lagoon or better than a Fontaine Peugeot. But in general, when I go and see these boats, I have sold these boats over the years. Yes, they are nice, but they don't really come up that same high quality standard as a full production boat.
The power of the CNC machines.
Yeah, exactly. And every boat will be the same when you get to a full production boat. But these individually, you might see one production boat like a Pescott Whitehaven like mine, and then one will be pretty rough and ready, and one will be pretty fancy. Mine somewhere in between. And there's varying qualities of build. The best built boats I've ever seen in my life are the one-off hand-laid boats. They're just absolutely beautiful. But the worst boats I've seen as well are the one-off hand-laid boats as well. I don't know, some of these boats must have been built by a blind boat builder in a very dark room, because some of the quality was just absolutely atrocious. But some of them are fantastic. So you've got varying degrees of quality there. Then you go into a small production type vessel. You've got the improved builder's quality. So, because you've always got a qualified boat builder there building the boat. One of the good advantages is you may want to customize that boat, which you won't be able to do with the large production companies. So on that small production,
just to interrupt there, when we talk about customization, we mean customization in terms of changing the entire cabin layout and so on. Obviously, there is some level of customization out of the factory on the production boats, but this is where you're changing the whole interior shape and design, yeah?
Yeah, some people might want to put an extra room or put two bunks in instead of having a big double bed, or they want to move a wall and put an extra bathroom in or something like that. And they might want to put 3 fridges out in the cockpit. because they have a lot of mates who drink beer and they want a lot of room out the back there, and also put all the fish. So by having that small production, the designer and the builder can work together and make some alterations and changes for you. So that's an advantage there. And, you know, the quality is going to be quite reasonable, and you know that that builder has always brought out a good range of boats, so you'll have a better resale price. So the cons of that, they're not as well known worldwide, because generally these companies are, you know, just locally, like might be an Australian style of boat, or it could be a boat which is built over in the US or in Canada, and we don't know about them here in Australia. Asia. So when they do come to Australia to sell, they're not as, the resale price will be lower. The manufacturing quality, once again, sometimes it can be fantastic, sometimes it's just average, but you don't really know that. But when you move into the full production, you know every boat will be pretty much the same.
And you jumped over the prices higher. Often they are.
Yeah, so once you want variations, it's like with that house. If you buy a display home and it's off the plan, that's it. You know that will be the price. But then you start asking things to be altered and varied, your variations, and the price just blows out. Because unfortunately with boats, it's very labour intensive. So your price will blow out like you wouldn't believe.
Okay, and then resale is because they're not so well known and so on.
Once again, they're not quite as much of an orphan, but not as well known, and so they'll be okay. But they won't turn over as fast as your everyday well-known production boats. So then we move on to our production boats. Once again, as I said, worldwide recognition. So whether it's a Lagoon, Fontainebleau, or a Leopard, everybody knows them around the world. Yeah, Outremer, any of those brands are known around the world. And so if you decide to sell your boat over to the States and sell it over there, or vice versa, people know that boat. The finish and production techniques are fantastic. You know, you hop inside these boats and they're just so well finished. The appointment ergonomics of these boats have been worked out so well.
They're continually improving, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. The volume and space. Now, Greg was talking about production techniques and these new technologies. All these new technologies and the new fibres and products, the way they're building boats, is actually giving you more internal space.
That's 3D design.
Yeah, 3D design. So they can design the whole boat, and you can have a virtual walk around inside these boats and know how much space is there, and there's no dead spaces or weird things sticking out. And the space is just so much greater in a 40-foot boat today than what a 40-foot boat was, say, going back 15 years ago, because we're using every bit of square inch. There's no dead spaces, and the modern fibres and fabrics mean you can actually get more usage, more space inside, and get more strength in the boat. Now, they do have a higher resale value, but also they turn over a lot faster. So you don't expect to get, 50% more, but you'll get a good sale price, and that boat won't be sitting on the market for 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months. If you have the right price on it and the boat presents well, it'll sell very fast. And then we go down to the last point there, warranty support and dealer networks. So if you are bringing out a boat, starting a boat out from a brand new Fontainebleau out from France, and you get to the other end, you can get the warranty work done. You can get support if something goes wrong with the GPS, it's not working, not talking to a plotter. There'll be somebody at the other end there ready to look after that boat and look after that and warranty those claims for you. Now, the cons of, I suppose the downside of a large production boat, less customization. To keep the price down, they've got to stick to certain models and so on. And that's it. You might have 4 or 5 or 6 different type of options of that one internal layout. They're not always built for speed. They're not going to be as light and as zippy as my boat, but it is getting better. They're improving all the time. Once with the weight saving and these special building techniques, it's getting better and better. They're getting faster, and their ride's getting far more comfortable.
Certain models.
Certain models, yeah. Now, some of the cons is too, well, some of the brands are made for the charter industry. And
not Fontainebleau.
No. Some of the brands are, we won't go into various brands,
Yeah.
but look, some of the brands are made particularly for the charter industry. And they have lots of big room inside and the cost is low, but they don't sail as well and they're just not finished quite as well. So there is a bit of a stigma there, and you can come around to our boat yards and have a look around and you'll see the differences in between some of these various brands, the more orientated ones for the cruising people and ones are more orientated for the charter industries.
Well, Phil, thank you very much. We could probably go on for hours, and we've only just scraped the surface with this presentation, but it's one of those how long is a piece of string questions about what to talk about and which topics to cover. But you've done a fantastic job there in the last 50 minutes of covering all that. We'll come to the questions and answers shortly because there's a few questions there. And if you've got any questions out there, folks, that you'd like to quickly type in now, you've got about a minute or two to get them in, and then we'll roll through and answer them.
I'd just like to say one more thing here, Greg, that
Yes.
we've been talking about all these various boats now. If you're buying a brand new boat, you're going to have the warranties and things like that, and boat's going to be looked after. If you buy a boat on the second-hand market, where it's a pre-loved boat, and it doesn't matter if you're buying it through a brokerage like ourselves or you're buying it from an individual, there's a couple of key things you really need to look at. So I strongly recommend any boat you buy on the second-hand market, you always get it surveyed. Get a good surveyor, independent surveyor to check out the boat. If you can find a surveyor that specialises in multi-hulls, that's even better, because then they know those various models, that there might be an issue with a crack which develops here or over time. You need to check this out. So they'll know exactly where to look for and make sure that boat's going to be strong and safe for you. And the other thing too, whether you're buying it privately or you're buying it through a brokerage, always have a written contract, because I've seen so many handshake deals happen. I've heard stories about them going south after the survey is done and so on. So make sure you have a proper contract in place so you know your rights as the buyer and the rights of the seller as well. So just a bit of heads up on that one. And there's plenty of surveyors out there advertised. We do have a list on our website, but also you can look up on Google and find many good surveyors out there.
Excellent information. So we've had quite a few questions about where to learn. Obviously, there's different people who are at different stages of the catamaran sailing spectrum. Some people have been sailing all their life and are ready now to go and pick up that catamaran that they've been looking at and go sailing once we're allowed to travel again. But other people are just dipping their toes into the whole pastime of sailing. So there's a few different ways to learn. One that's really important that I wanted to bring up, and sorry for the blatant plug, but I'm going to do it for Sunshine Sailing, a guy called John Bankard up there in Mooloolaba. He has now got access to an Astrea 42 Fontaine Peugeot, and he is now going to start offering in the months ahead dedicated learning to sail classes or courses on a catamaran. And I think that's something that's been lacking in Australia, Phil. You've been in the industry a long time, where there's a sailing school who says, I'm going to teach you on a catamaran.
It's not as many around. Down at Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron in Brisbane, they can do the charters. They can do some sailing down there. On there's a lagoon being used down there for some sailing lessons, and I believe they've got access to a sea wind. And I'm not too sure about the Sydney market, but I believe there are a couple of catamarans becoming available down in the Pittwater region.
And then the other one is a lot of people are actually asking, you know, sure, we've got the electronics on board and you don't need to learn how to navigate anymore, but it's a good thing to do. And something that's popped up a lot across my desk recently is there's online navigation, great things to do while we're in lockdown. There's one there is Nav at Home. It's a Western Australian company, but you can do online courses, and that's a really good way to brush up on the theory of sailing. The other choice, of course, is John has got his offshore cruising preparation course, a series of fantastic videos, and that's not catamaran specific with John. It's across the board, but some really good content in those videos there. And of course, the other way to play is to charter a multi-hull, and we can help people do that. It's often the old try before you buy is a good way to brush up the skills, and also to come up with an idea of which multi-hull it is that you'd like to then purchase and sail across the ocean or up the Queensland coast and so on. And you can just about charter most models of multi-hull these days. Now, I'm just going to bring up the questions here. There was one question there: how much does it roughly cost to move a boat 1,000 miles? I can give an answer on that myself. Only recently we got a quote. So if you were to pick a boat up in France from the factory in La Rochelle, as an example, it's about €3.50. 3.5 euros per nautical mile would get you a professional delivery crew. In Australia, it's probably about the same, isn't it, Phil? If you were to convert that.
It does vary on the type of where you're sailing to and the weather windows and so on. So if it's going to be down in Melbourne across Bass Strait the wrong time of year, you might find it costs a little bit more money. Whereas tropical cruising up in Queensland at the right time of year, just put the spinnaker up and just sail downwind. Away we go. It makes it nice and easy.
And there's another really excellent question there about what would you recommend for a minimum set of sails for cruising? And I think that's a really good question. I actually said to Phil yesterday, this question will be asked. So most of the catamarans come with a standard mainsail and headsail or genoa or jib. You can give it whichever name you like. And then an option that comes out of the factory with a lot of the boats is then a bowsprit and a jenica. And then the other sail that is more and more being used by the ocean cruising people these days is a thing called the parasailer. You said you didn't have a parasailer on the Neil 51 coming across the Pacific. I know that Gordon and Louise did on the Elba 45, and they loved it until they maybe mistreated it. One day heading across the Caribbean to the Panama, they actually shredded it, as they said, but they blamed themselves, not the sail. But you came across, you basically have a 3-sail wardrobe, Phil?
Look, yeah, basically most people I see on the boats have the mainsail and then they have a genoa. Now it all depends on where you're sailing. Genoa is great when you're in the tropical sailing. We don't have particularly big, strong winds up here in Queensland all the time. But if you're down in Victoria, down in Tassie, I definitely make sure you've got a mainsail with 3 reefs in it, and you'd have a small self-tacking jib or a small jib, because you obviously get a lot more gusts and a lot more fronts come through down there. But when you get into tropical cruising, it's a lot more forgiving. When we sailed across the Pacific on the Neil 51, we had a mainsail, we had a headsail on a furler, then we had a genoa on a furler, and then we had the spinnaker as well, just a conventional spinnaker, which was in a sock. Spinnakers are rather hard to use. You've got to know what you're doing, so I wouldn't recommend it to people who are just getting used to sailing or very limited experience. So the other way of doing things, you have a jenica, or in Australia we have the thing called a screecher, which is like a big headsail, which is out on the end of the spinnaker pole, which can furl in and furl out. So that's as you get more advanced, a little bit game, you can go and purchase one of those as well and start using that. They work great for downwind sailing and reaching and so on. The other thing is, if you are in a very windy area, you know, Tasmania, down in South Australia, or Victoria, when you get the fronts coming through, probably a storm jib wouldn't go astray as well. So you can always furl in your genoa, but you have to drive to windward. They don't work that well, but that's probably main and a jib to start off with, main and genoa in the tropics.
And listen, while I've got you there, Phil, I just want to also acknowledge that I can see there with the participants, we've got a lot of people here. This is not just an Australian audience. We've got people from all over Asia. So thank you. We've got people who have tuned in from the Philippines, from Thailand, New Zealand, and also Indonesia. So thank you. And we understand that up in those parts of the world, you generally have lighter winds. So everything Phil said about the sail wardrobe is applicable. But I just want to acknowledge and thank those people for joining in. And apologies if we've been a little bit Australian-centric today. Also, another question there was the as we're talking about, someone has asked and I'll answer this one, a very appropriate question. It's about talking about resale value. What's the impact of COVID crisis on the resale market? It's a good question. We've experienced over the last 1 month or 2 months of this crisis that for the first few weeks, it was a bit of shock and awe. Everyone obviously went back into their shells. And then over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had an increase in both our brokerage business and also our new yacht sales business in inquiry and in engagement. I'm not necessarily saying we've had more sales or a rush on sales, but we've certainly had a really good engagement from clients who are planning and wanting to move their decision to go sailing either forward or backwards. In terms of price, we haven't seen any impact on price yet. And I don't think, and I know some of you will probably go, oh yeah, but it's true. Some people, it's certainly a buyer's market. It's a good time to make an offer. I know Patrick, my brokerage manager, is on this call, and I'm sure he would agree. It's if you see the boat you like on our brokerage website, call our brokerage team and they'll give you some guidance. But has there been an impact on price? I think it's hard to tell just yet, is the answer there. Someone also asked what brands are not made for charter. I don't want to go into a brand bashing session here, so I won't get too specific. Our brand, of course, is Fontaine-Pajot. I can tell you that Fontaine-Pajot was designed back in the 70s by the Fontaine-Pajot company as a boat for the private buyer. And it's always maintained that as a pedigree. And so they've always focused on designing and manufacturing a boat that suits the private buyer. And one example is that picture on the screen right there where the steering station is offset. It's not a fly bridge, it's offset so that when you're sailing as a couple or just 2 or 3 people, you can sit there in the helm station and you can easily communicate with each other. That's a classic example of a boat that's been designed for private use rather than charter, because it's been designed so that you can engage and operate the boat with a lesser number of people. What about downwind? I understand cats are very light up front and dig in. Phil, I'll get you to answer that question. It's a pretty standard question, isn't it, when it comes to multi-hulls?
Yeah, I don't understand that question because no, they don't dig in. If they're light up front, they will be less likely to dig in because they're light and they're more buoyant. If you're doing the wrong thing and haven't set your boat up properly, one thing I do say to people when you're sailing downwind, have the sails at the front working and drop the mainsail. So if you're cruising downwind, have 1 or 2 reefs in the main and have that genoa out the front, and the boat will be so balanced, your autopilot won't be working very hard at all. You'll be saving on battery power, and you make sure the sails are eased out to the right angle and you'll actually get lift. That's the good thing about things like parasails and spinnakers. They actually do lift the bows of the boat, and so they bubble along very, very nicely. So they shouldn't dig in. The only reason they would dig in if they're very, very fine bows. In the old days, some of the boats to make them super fast made them very fine in the bows. So then they would dig in because there's less buoyancy. But we don't do that anymore. You'll find, especially the cruising boats, they want buoyancy, so they're very full in the bows. They won't push their bows down.
Quick question there. Cost of a survey on the Queensland coast over the years of you doing what you're doing, how much does a surveyor normally charge, Phil?
Oh,
bit hard. How long's a piece of string?
Yes. Look, it's generally depends which state you're in. New South Wales is always more expensive than Queensland. So generally in Queensland, I think it's around about $25 per foot. New South Wales, I think it can go up to $35.
Okay, thank you. And a really good question there. Do you require a special license to offshore racing? An excellent question. It's really interesting. If you want to buy an Astrea 42 or an Elba 45 or any model and go and pick it up privately and sail it around the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic or across the Pacific, believe it or not, you don't have to have a license. If you want to go and charter a boat in the Mediterranean, guess what you need? You have to have a license. However, we always recommend that it would be just prudent to go and get some training, go and do an RYA course or an IYT course, or go and do some navigation courses, because it's just peace of mind. But the exact thing is, you don't actually have to have a license to go and purchase a catamaran and sail it. I think in Queensland, do you need to have a powerboat license?
You've got to have a marine license in Queensland. I think you've got to do the same in New South Wales now too. But
yep.
You've got to, if you've got so many horsepower, I think it's over 5 horsepower now in Queensland, you've got to have with your driver's license attached to that, there is a Queensland boating law.
And Peter Schwartz over in Tahiti just clarified for me there, it's only no license if it's not European flagged.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. And then there's Neil Cleaver asked a question earlier, is there a size above which anchorages become impractical? I don't believe there is, Neil. There is the point around different size boats being suitable for sailing and cruising around the Mediterranean. Sometimes people choose to take the Astrea 42 or the Lucia 40 as an example to sail and cruise the Mediterranean, because the costs of going in and the accessibility into different marinas and into the berthing areas where you drop your anchor and reverse into the quay, it's easier on a slightly smaller boat. But in terms of anchorage, there's never really a limit. Some of the biggest private boats in the world are cruising around. So not so much an anchorage and sorry to be Australian centric, and I'm not sure about Thailand, but I know also in Queensland there is some restriction on size at certain anchorages, but I wouldn't say that size limits anchorage ability. Do you agree, Phil?
No, if it's a 60-foot catamaran, it'll anchor nicely and very snugly. Actually, just on that anchoring side of things, on that photograph we're finishing up there, you'll see just under the forebeam a black rope. Yes. I don't know if you can point to that with your pointer there, Greg, but that's the bridle. So once you put a anchoring bridle on the front of a catamaran, those cats, doesn't matter if it's a 40-foot boat or a 60-foot cat, they just sit so snugly and straight into the wind. They don't hunt around. So they're actually more secure than a 60-foot monohull.
Okay. And now, Ian asked a question earlier on. Because of my lack of sailing experience, I was thinking of a power cat to go cruising. I want to cruise Southeast Asia. Would you advise me to learn more about sailing rather than go with power? I'll be honest, Ian, you can do both. If you would like to cruise on a power catamaran, which there are already numerous people doing, you can, or you can learn to sail and do it on a sailboat. That is something that you have the choice. It just depends on your personal preference. And then I think that could be all of the questions at the moment. If we've missed a question, we do apologise. We've tried our hardest to answer your questions there. Just one other couple of quick points. Virtual marinas. A lot of people have seen that email. You can now click on and have a look at the Fontaine Bajots in our virtual marina. We've also now got the virtual boat shows on our website, where you can click on, and on pre-owned boats you can now click and do online walkthroughs. So these are all the tools we've implemented in the last 1 or 2 months because of COVID and the impact of that. We've come up with some creative ways of helping people to still have a good look at the boats that they'd like to think about purchasing. Just some other quick news. The Elba 45 #1 arrived in Australia 2 weeks ago with Gordon and Louise. They sailed across they left Panama Canal on February the 28th and arrived on Anzac Day, April the 25th, I think it was. So they did fantastically. If anyone would like to get a link to that site there so they can read through their voyage blog, don't hesitate to contact us. You can email myself or Anna or any of your Multihull Solutions contacts, and we can send you a link to that. They've also done a video diary. We've done the first 2 episodes of that. Rachel has been putting those together. They're fantastic. And then some other YouTube channels that you might be interested in just having a look at. Let's Dance Sailing, our friends Michael and Marita, who are waiting at the moment to pick up their brand new Elba 45. They've got an excellent YouTube channel there that gives a really good interesting insight into picking up a Fontaine-Pajot at the factory and then sailing off and doing a few seasons in the Med. And now, as I say, they're heading back shortly to go and do the same thing on their new Elba 45. And if you are a person out there who's considering the factory pickup, taking one of our multi-hull solutions, Fontaine-Pajot Catamarans or a Neil trimaran from the factory and then sailing through the Med and across the Atlantic and then gradually home to Australia or Asia or New Zealand, we've got an excellent package of videos now that Nod and Rachel have put together about how to pick up your yacht. And I think there's 10 episodes of small 3-minute videos helping people understand how to pick up a boat from the factory. And then we're back to our next webinar. So, and I've just been told Michael and Marita are online, so that's great. Hello there in Turkey. And for now, Phil, I'd like to thank you. That was fantastic. Have you got anything else to add, mate?
No, I think that's about it. The only thing I was just going to say, those people are a little bit new to sailing, want to learn more about it. The Royal Yachting Association, RYA, those courses they have from beginners courses, radio operators courses to quite advanced courses. So most major yacht clubs across Australia and around the world have the Royal Yachting Association courses. So that's probably a good one to look up to cover all types of sailing and electronics and navigation.
All right, so that's fantastic. So listen, as I said, we encourage you, if you've got any questions or if you want to find out more, just contact your Multihull Solutions salesperson or point of contact, the person who you've got that relationship with, and carry on some discussion. And we hope to see everyone next week on the walkthrough of the brand new Fontaine-Pajot Elba 45, Gordon and Louise's lovely yacht. We've got Nod is going to give us a detailed walkthrough. A lot of people are waiting to see that because we were all supposed to be at the Sanctuary Cove Boat Show, well, soon, but we're not going to be there. So the next best thing is a live walkthrough of the Elba 45. And if there's anything that any of our clients out there would like to get us to do a webinar about, give us suggestions. We're all ears, and we'll be happy to take it on board, take your suggestions on board, and if we can do it, we will. So thank you very much. We're signing off. Thanks, Phil. Well done.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see everyone next week.
No worries. I'm going sailing now.
Good on you.
Yeah.
Now I've got to work out how to stop this.